Hello and welcome to another edition of Sky Career Talks, where we display why it's great to learn with us and communicate. I'm your host, Dion Wright, and today I'm really excited to have our guest, Shaun Mickus. Shaun is a Rutgers alumnus with a background in communications and has extensive experience in corporate citizenship and sustainability and strategic philanthropy for social impact. He currently serves as the Senior Director for Local Community Impact for the Global Community Impact Team at Johnson & Johnson. Shaun, thank you again for taking the time, and we really appreciate you being here.
Pleasure to be here, Dion.
Awesome. So I'm just going to dive straight in. So give us a brief overview of your career journey, and then also to maybe explain a little bit of what corporate social responsibility is.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm a two-time graduate of Rutgers, having done my undergrad in communication and English and a master's degree with the MCIS program. About 30 years of experience in healthcare. Most of it with J&J. I've been in communication roles, advertising roles, community engagement, philanthropy, as you said. And, so for the past 7 or 8 years, I've been in this space. And I think the best way I could describe strategic philanthropy and community engagement is, how are we thinking about addressing some of the world's most pressing healthcare challenges? As a healthcare company, that's what we're about, obviously. And so when we think about the community, what can we be doing to address the challenges in health inequities that some populations are facing? A lack of women in STEM careers, and how can we change the tide on that and do mentoring programs and so forth. So there's a lot that goes into that. And we have, a global strategy that we localize for certain markets to bring that to life. And many partners, large and small organizations we work with to provide thought leadership on different programs that are going to really have an impact in those local communities.
Absolutely. Yeah, community engagement seems, obviously is like the hallmark of what you do. And really, how does communications come into that? Like, how did your background in communications prepare you specifically to be in community engagement and corporate philanthropy? And why is it so important to communicate with the public and with stakeholders about the initiatives that Johnson & Johnson is undertaking?
Yeah, well, obviously it's critically important to make sure you have the right messages for the right audiences at the right time. And so having a communications background has certainly helped in that regard. We always want to make sure that, first we have terrific programs that are addressing critical needs and ultimately measuring impact. And along the way, working with partners, developing the plans, developing how you're going to communicate those plans is vital and critically important. And it's probably the success factor on these programs, whether they will, have the ability to succeed or not. And so having the background in communications certainly helps from, creating plans, strategic plans, to getting really precise on the messaging that goes out to certain audiences to ensure that, we're addressing their needs and, it's having impact ultimately.
Indeed. So what is what does a typical day look like for you? I think sometimes people really don't know, when you come in to when the time you leave, what does that look like in corporate social responsibility?
Yeah, I think, and you probably hear this from a lot of people, there's no typical day, and that is the case. I think for our team, for my team in particular, it's trying to understand what the needs are in the marketplace and communities around the world. So I have people on my team who have responsibility for certain markets. Like I have a colleague who's based in Mexico, and the context there in healthcare is a bit different than it is in another market like the UK or the US or South Africa. And so, having the conversations with people like her and seeing what she's seeing on the ground, and she has conversations with local partners to figure out what those challenges are. And then from there, we think about our strategy and how can we bring programming and partnerships to the table that'll help to really make a difference. So in that respect, we do have a lot of conversations with stakeholder groups, of large and small. We talk a lot with our colleagues. We certainly don't have all the answers, sitting in our individual offices, but I think it's through, that collaborative spirit that we try to get to the heart of of what the issues are. And then, obviously we can't address everything out there. No organization can. But having a strategy does help us as we start to pinpoint programs that are really going to make a difference.
Absolutely. And I think too, you kind of touched on it, but when no day quite looks the same, it's really important to prioritize what you're working on this day or this week, and know what needs to be addressed now and know what needs to be addressed later. My next question is going to be, how has the pandemic really changed what you guys do? Has that slowed down things, or has it, being virtual, has that streamlined the process?
Yeah, well, it's a terrific question. And obviously, we have had to deal with, how do you be more agile and flexible in the new reality that we have? I think for us in our group in total, going into the pandemic, we had a strategy. We had partners and we had various programs. Then when the pandemic came along, we had to do a lot of pivoting, not so much on the strategy per se, but the types of programs we would do to deliver on the strategy, knowing that you had COVID in context. And so an example of this would be I have colleagues on my team who manage our employee engagement programs called Talent for Good, and there everything when you talk about skills-based volunteering of our colleagues in the pre-pandemic, of course, most of that was in person. It had to shift, everything had to shift for a period of time to virtual. And so there was a lot of pivoting there to ensure that we're keeping people safe and healthy and so forth, and still trying to address those critical needs that didn't go away. They only got worse, right? So that's one example of many that we could point to. So sure, we've had to be agile, flexible. We're always empathetic, but having more empathy in trying to address these needs and to really be the leaders we are and trying to do the right thing in our communities and address the needs of the pandemic.
Indeed. And I think too, that word empathy is very powerful. And I think, especially with your background in communications, being empathetic and really understanding the situation of stakeholders is critical for the success of an organization, to the success of the mission. And then finally, one other thing for my final question, to touch on something you just said, was you guys were very proactive rather than reactive. You guys had a plan going into the pandemic, and I think that being proactive is a great thing for students and for people advancing their career as well. So for you, like as a mentor in our Skylinks program now, knowing all that you know, what's the best way that a student or someone getting into the career can be proactive in forming their career in this field, and not being reactive and just figuring it out as they go along?
Yeah, no, it's another great question. And I would say, being a part, first and foremost, being part of the mentoring program, I get a lot out of the program myself, because, I think there's a lot of mentoring going back and forth, student to mentor, back and forth. I think, being proactive is really important. And I kind of take a look at, some of the things that I did early on as a student, as a grad student. And I always say, the typical things like network and making sure that you are out there, talking with different people, learning and being the, forever a student of learning and being curious, and not being afraid to ask questions. I mean, sometimes you're going to be pleasantly surprised by the answers, and certainly that has been my case, ask questions. And really focus on building, long-lasting relationships, not making them transactional, but really taking a deeper dive, getting to know people, and that sort of thing. I can tell you over my 30 years, the many mentors that I've been privileged to have, I keep in touch with a lot of them. Many of them are since retired and go back 30 years, and I'm still keeping in contact with them, whether it's a phone call every now and then, a chat on Facebook, wherever it might be. And then, a couple other thoughts about being proactive. I would say, be a mentee and a mentor and pay it forward. Even if you're a student, you still have, you have things to offer other colleagues. And in my case, I'm a mentor and I'm mentored. Students, help me to get better. And there are a lot of examples I could point to on that. And then the final thing I would say in terms of being proactive is just, leading with your actions and your words and being, a servant leader. Servant leadership, I think, is important. Being an empathetic leader and putting yourself out there, I think, is important as well.
Absolutely. Well, one major theme of this entire conversation has been empathy, has been service, and has been the learning never ends. Like, always be willing to learn, and you never know where that's going to come from or who that's going to come from. And it could come from you, the mentee, just like it could come from a mentor. So, Shaun, thank you again so much for taking your time, and thank you for what you and your team do at Johnson & Johnson. And thanks again for being a Skylinks mentor. We really appreciate you and your knowledge and contributing that to us.
Dion, thank you for the time. Thank you for reaching out to me, and real pleasure getting to know you. And let's keep the dialogue going.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
Take care.